Welcome back to Mastering Change.
Today we're joined by Cipriana and TK Quann, sisters, creatives and storytellers who've used their voices to speak openly about healing from trauma.
In this conversation, they reflect on growing up in a household where silence was a survival strategy and how that shaped their early identities.
We talk about what it means to break away from family patterns, how shame can take root early, and why expression through creativity, boundaries, or sisterhood can be a path to healing.
It's a conversation about coming back to yourself and learning how to live from a place of truth.
Here are the incredible Quann sisters. Cipriana and TK, otherwise known as the Quann sisters, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our podcast today. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much, Emma. Thank you for having us.
Hi, welcome. So as most of our podcast listeners will now know, we start every podcast with a little card game. The idea behind the card game is that it's a kind of bridge to connection. There is a little prompt on each of these cards, and the idea being that you will have a little story to tell us based on that prompt. So I'm going to pick one. I've just picked a few cards out of the pack, and I'm going to pick one of them. And if you both give us your answer separately, we'll see what happens. So, a spiritual experience that changed my life. ...
You know what? Sure. Spiritual experience I had that changed my life is when I first tried ibogaine almost going on a year and a half now. I had a deeply spiritual experience which changed my lifestyle in a way that altered my health and healing drastically. And I would actually say the same thing. My spiritual experience really, I mean, to be honest, the first time I felt like a really deep spiritual experience has been my work with psychedelic medicines. I remember the first one of the most impactful spiritual experiences was when I began to feel very connected to my ancestors. And, to hear me say that now, I would have been like, girl, you're in some Woodstock hippie kind of, like, I would never think of myself saying like, oh, I had this huge spiritual experience, but I felt very connected to my ancestors and recognizing the strength within me as a woman, especially with our experiences as children and what we dealt with regarding sexual abuse. So being a woman and an adult and feeling the strength and seeing the beauty of being a woman, I really recognize that in one of my really big, impactful spiritual experiences.
Great. Well, if I can ask you just to introduce yourselves to camera, and then I think that's a great place for us to start then, if you can expand out on that story a bit.
Hi, I'm Cipriana Quann. I'm TK Quann, and we're the sisters. So we're writers, public speakers, we're big advocates, mental health and awareness advocates. Also childhood sexual abuse survivor advocates as well.
All of our regular listeners know that this is a platform for people to come and talk about how they relate to that field of trauma, mental health and wellbeing. I think we've got a sense and a flavour of that, but maybe you can land us in that a bit more squarely as to how, your lived experience and how that's sort of transferred into your work.
We are identical twin sisters and we experience very identical trauma, abuse. We grew up in a household where our mother was a financial caretaker of an incredible, amazing woman, but she was working a corporate job and going to one of the top universities in the country, so she was rarely home. So our father was the one that was taking care of us at home. And while she was away, this is when we were sexually, physically, and emotionally abused every day for over 10 years, starting at the age of 5 years old. And I would say 5 years old because that's the earliest memory we can remember. And my sister and I spoke out. I've been speaking out regarding what we experienced maybe about 5 years ago, regarding the physical abuse that we went through. But my sister didn't feel comfortable at that time speaking about the sexual trauma. I've always been comfortable talking about physical abuse. So around the same time that we publicly made it aware of our childhood background, it's interesting how shame really has a way of crippling you from wanting to share what you experienced, the trauma as a child. So sexual abuse was very difficult for me. I still harbored a lot of shame around it. So I didn't release the shame until late, was it 2022? When I reached a point in my healing where I was comfortable to talk about it. But it's still something that I am working through now, and we're 47 years old. So this is something that is ongoing. That's why I say there's no ED in healing. It's always ING healing. Like, I'm going to be in this journey for the rest of my life, but sort of having this revelation, understanding that healing is a continuing journey has really transformed the way I think about what we experience as children. And sexual trauma is a type of abuse that is very, very common, but not spoken about a lot. So I think for us, because we've always have very comfortable with speaking out about certain things, I came to a point where I was feeling very frustrated and not revealing to our audience what was really helping me transform in a way that was really propelling my healing journey. And a lot of people would reach out and be like, well, how did you get to the state of healing where you are now? And I would always say, I focused on health and fitness, but it was really the component of working with medicinal plants that really broke all those aspects about my part, all these subconscious things I was still holding on from our childhood. So I was able to heal. Because there's so much stigma around psychedelic plants that I had a lot of vacillation and even talking about it because you fear the consequences. We are women still trying to make our way in the world as far as careers, and there's consequences when people look at psychedelics as, oh, that's just a drug. And that's the way that I used to look at psychedelics still. It's like, oh, they're just drugs. I would never touch it with a 10-foot pole. But really learning about these plants and what they can do for healing and trauma really drastically changed the way I thought about them. But I used to be one of those people that thought the same thing and believed all the stigma. So I had a lot of vacillation about even talking about this subject because I feared the consequences. But as he said, I got to a point where it felt exhausting to sort of hide this part of myself that was so essential in the way that it's so essential to my health because my health was in a year and a half ago, health wise, I was in a very difficult place.
And how did you come across like the plant medicine? How did you find out about that this was a route into healing trauma?
Well, for me, I started working with medicinal plants going on over 8 years ago. So I started as my sister mentioned, you're 47. So I started when I was 37, and it just happened to be, and I wasn't going into the intention that this was going to be like one of the biggest healing modalities of my life. I went in more as a curiosity. So you went in very leery. Yes, but I was open to. So let me say this: our father is an ex-heroin addict. So before he married our mother, he kicked the habit, but he was very adamant that we never touch drugs ever. So we were walking through this life thinking that anything that we heard was a drug or considered a drug was bad. It just was not to be touched unless you were in the hospital and you needed it for, emergency care. But other than that, recreational, we didn't touch it. So I met my partner 9 years ago, and he had two really good friends, and they went to Burning Man. So I was just like, ooh, again, I was like, this is like some real hippie Woodstock stuff. But he had a really close friend that he trusted and said that his friend went to the ceremony at Burning Man, and that they had a really transformational experience. So he was able to get in touch with the facilitator, and we had a private session. So it was myself, my partner, and two of our really good friends. And I went into this experience where I met the facilitator. I said that I don't feel comfortable in partaking in any of the drugs, which is what I called it then. Now I call it medicine. But I was like, I'll participate in the sound meditation because it was an 8-hour sound meditation facilitated with medicinal plants. And the facilitator was great. He was like, no problem. You do what you feels comfortable. But let me just, before we start the experience, let me sit down and tell you about, medicinal plants and how it works in a healing setting along with the music. So he sat down with us for 3 hours before our 8-hour session and talked about the history, showed us the research and the science and how it was like really beneficial for people with PTSD. And hearing PTSD, I didn't think I had PTSD. It's just something that we never thought about. And by the time he was finished, I was like, okay, I'll try a little bit because that's one thing about us. I don't judge others.
I'll try the drug.
Yeah, I was like, I don't judge others, but when you're like given the knowledge and the information and actual factual. So when he was finished, I was very, very open-minded and trying just a little. And so by the time at the end of my 8-hour session, I was actually crying the entire time, and I didn't know the reason why I was crying. And, it wasn't a wailing. It was just tears were coming down my eyes. I was late and like with my eye mask on, listening to the music. And I remember thinking, why am I crying so much? And a voice came into my head, which was my voice. But it was a voice that was sharing something that I was holding on to subconsciously for decades that I didn't know that I was holding on to. And it said, oh, because if you cry, the abuse will become worse. So we were taught at a very young age as little girls to not cry, or the abuse, the sexual abuse, the physical abuse would become worse. So I didn't realize that this was something that was innately in me for decades. And this was the first time I was letting go of all those emotions I was holding on to that we were taught to at a very young age to hide since we were little girls. And it was just coming, releasing. And, for me, who just had my first experience almost a year and a half ago, I saw the transformation that psychedelic plants had for my sister's healing and health. I would say about 7 or 8 years ago, my health started to drastically decline because we developed coping mechanisms as children to refine sugar and ultra processed food. This was a coping mechanism that developed into a full-blown addiction in our early adulthood and up until a year and a half ago. So I saw the way that my sister was soaring and transforming in a way that I was unable to, even though I looked at her and said, we're identical twins. We've experienced nearly identical trauma. We have identical coping mechanisms that evolved into identical addictions, and she's healing in a way that I'm just unable to. And I was so incredibly proud of her progress, but so devastatingly disappointed in my journey. So I didn't seriously consider psychedelics until 2 years ago, when I saw my sister's journey with ibogaine specifically. And I saw the impact it had on her, even amongst all the other psychedelics that she's tried. I felt ibogaine for me, there was something that really connected me to her experience with ibogaine, so I became open to trying it. We went to a facility called Beyond in Mexico. I had trepidation the moment that I was administered ibogaine, but I just knew that something had to change. I had very severe chronic diseases due to my addiction to sugar and refined sugar and ultra processed food. I was 110 pounds obese. I was had hypertension. I was pre-diabetic. I had debilitating pain, physical pain every single day. It felt paralyzing. I developed fibroids. I had extreme fatigue. And those were just a few, but they were very severe. And when I had my experience with ibogaine, I had this revelation. I said that I didn't realize it, that all of our childhood, we were so used to abuse that we became acclimated to it. So I didn't recognize that I became my own abuser, perpetuating the abuse upon myself as an adult. And I was doing it through my food choices. And I had that aha moment. And the first time in my decades long addiction to this food, I didn't have a craving. I had never felt that in my life. And I said at the time, I was the heaviest I'd ever weighed, but it was the lightest I had ever felt in my life after my experience with Ibogaine. So it changed me in ways I least expected, but I definitely needed.
With Ibogaine, what was it about Ibogaine specifically that you felt connected to or that you felt drawn to? Do you know?
I think I was drawn by my sister's experiences. That's why we always talk about how impactful stories are to the space. I always say that the science is important, but the stories are just as impactful. So for me, it was listening to my sister's experience of Ibogaine that made me feel like there was something about it that had a stronger connection even with psilocybin. I think because I had an experience with psilocybin with my sister, although the experience wasn't something that I was fully immersed to at the time. That's why I consider Ibogaine my first psychedelic experience. But I think seeing my sister's experience, her even talking about the visions that she had, there was something that connected with me on a deeper level, especially ancestrally wise, like ancestry. I had a lot of deep ancestral visions during my experience. And there was something really special about it that connected with me in a way that I didn't expect, but I knew it felt familiar because of my sister's own experience. And I know for me, prior, I mentioned briefly about because of our experience of being sexually abused for over 10 years and how extensive that abuse was, I felt very uncomfortable with the feminine side of myself. So my experience with Ibogaine really made me feel comfortable in my womanhood because for decades I was subconsciously holding on to this thought process that the femininity side or was weak because in some way I associated that me being a woman is what caused the sexual abuse. So my experience with Ibogaine really made me open up and see the beauty and strength of being a woman, and that the femininity is strength and not weakness. So that was something that I didn't realize I was holding on to, and that was just 2 years ago. So for me, that was a very monumental uh, experience, and just feeling those emotions and feeling comfortable in myself and in my femininity.
You've described quite different responses to the trauma. One was deeply around addiction to, I can really relate, sugar and ultra processed foods and that kind of dopamine hit that can, that cycle of seeking. And yours was more about your kind of this kind of view of you as a woman. Is that fair that you manifest
Well,
in slightly different ways, or?
Well, it is because I actually had very similar experiences with my sister regarding I was very addicted to sugar. I didn't gain over 100 pounds, but at one point I was over 60 pounds because of so much ultra processed food and refined sugar I was eating. It's just that my process started about maybe 10 years before my sister. We looked into, you're pre-diabetic. Yeah, I was pre-diabetic. I was going blind in one of my eyes. I had hypertension. I had nerve damage. So I had almost very similar ailments as my sister. It's just that my journey started like almost a decade before hers did. And the story was so to be because I knew that she experienced the same emotions. And like I said, I was so proud of her and how she evolved. But I felt because we experienced similar trauma that she had gotten out of this sort of rut that she had been in, and I was stuck in it, and I just didn't know how to get out.
One of the things I really like and appreciate about your kind of story and journey into plant medicine, and I think it's a really important thing to talk about actually, is this the almost the fact that both of you felt called to a specific medicine, but also called to do it. Like when Cipriana, when you said, when you know the first time you did it 10 years ago, you weren't going to, right? And you and the guide or the person that you were working with that said, don't worry, that's absolutely fine, your choice. But as he then talked to you about the medicine and the history and stuff, you obviously then felt a calling to do it. And I think we talk about, there's often in the psychedelic space, people talk about, the importance of preparation and the importance of actually the experience, and then the importance of integration. But I also think there is a pre-preparation stage, which is where you sit with yourself and you ask yourself, is this something I really want to do? And I think the medicine will talk to us, like it will say, yes, this is something you should do, or it's something that you shouldn't do. And I think, TK, maybe it took you longer time for you to hear the call of the medicine, and when you did, you suddenly, so it was the right time for you to take it. But I do, because I think a lot of people don't do that pre-preparation stage, and I think a lot of people, and my worry is with psychedelics becoming more and more popular, that people will say, oh, you to people, oh, you should do this medicine, and they might take a medicine that they haven't been called to, or they will take it because so and so said it, rather than sitting, waiting, actually listening to themselves and the medicine before taking it. So I think it's a really important part of your story actually to mention that.
I'm actually glad that you have mentioned that, because a lot of times you'll hear this in this space often, that, psychedelics, it's not like the silver bullet, it's not the magic pill. But for me, I like to say that I think it is the magic pill along with integration. So you have all these amazing insights that flood in during your psychedelic experiences. So I say, if you want those insights to last just in the moment, then you won't partake in any type of integrative practices that will last. But if you want those insights to last for the rest of your life, then you implement integrative practices. Yeah, implementing integration is essential, because that's something that I never considered. My integrative practices and my lifestyle change, and walking every day, being in the sun, cutting out all those foods that cause all these health complications. I think that integration is just as important as the experience of the psychedelic itself. I don't think I think one cannot exist without the other. I think when you just experience a psychedelic and you don't have integration, that's something that's supposed to you carry with you for, I would hope, for the rest of your life. I think when people think about it in that way, then I think it might change the way they think about, like, oh, I'm just going to try this. Because for me, it's about setting an intention. They always say set an intention, but no expectations. So I know going in it, for me personally, I said my intention was healthier body. And when I had my experience, the TMI, had to go to the bathroom a lot. So I felt like I was purging all this toxicity from my body, and I was actually manifesting my intention. And my intention was healthier body, which led into integrated practices, which I still carried with me today. But I don't think one can exist without the other, at least if you're looking at this in a sort of healthier way to implement psychedelics into your life. No, this way it is. Also, just real quickly, that during my very first experience 8 years ago was actually that practice of, because before I went into the sound meditation psychedelic experience, I had to prep my body. So it was, no refined sugar, no ultra processed food, no alcohol, obviously no other kinds of medication. Make sure you eat like very cold foods. So that was the first time in my life that I ever really focused on, for like about 2 months prior, to really making sure that I implemented that in my lifestyle. So after my first experience with psychedelics, I felt so good. And I realized the correlation. I was just like, I should be treating myself like this all the time. This should be my lifestyle. So the prep before going into that experience was also another transformational element of what really propelled my healing here. It was not only transformative, because I had the opposite reaction. I ate everything that I could right before my advocate session, because I joked. I was like, Although I'm probably not gonna eat. I have these big favorite cookies. I call them the devil cookies. I would just eat these all the time. And before I left for Mexico, I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna eat all these cookies because you might not know. Like when I come back, I may never touch the cookie again." And when I came back, I didn't. I still haven't touched those cookies I used to like constantly consume. But I did none of the prep, but all my prep after.
I was going to make the observation around the before as well. I think in what both of you've shared, different experiences to the plant medicine, but there was a need to feel physically and psychologically safe. I think as you described that 3 hours of actually, let me talk to you about the science, the data that underpins the clinical efficacy of this. Because you know, and I think that is important, is getting to that place of feeling safe as well, to be that vulnerable, to kind of hand yourself over to that process. And the other observation, which is at the other end of the experience, is, you know, what we know from Ibogaine and Minter. Maybe you can remember the researcher that we listened to at Bessel's conference, who was talking about um, how psychedelics open the developmental window, and that's why those insights come through. But Ibogaine, whereas something like psilocybin, it's very brief opening of that window, hours. Whereas something like Ibogaine, and this is why you know, it can be a challenge without proper integration, can open that developmental window for months. And so, you know, again, you both talked about the importance of integration and having a strong practice that would help take those insights and process them over a quite a considerable period of time. And I think that's the other piece that's so profound in the sharing of your experience, was the commitment not only to the work before, but to that integration, into that integration afterwards.
So it was Gull, the researcher that you're talking about from Bessel's conference was a researcher called Gull Dolan, and she basically, do you know her? Yeah. So
Yeah.
she said with Dolan's team at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine had been studying and expanding what was known about how psychedelics could help reopen finite windows of opportunity, called, Emma was mentioning, called critical periods. And these brief openings as the brain develops enable rapid learning, like language in humans. They've been a focus of neuroscience for nearly a century. And then when paired with therapy, Dolan believes these drugs can help treat disorders caused by mental trauma or even strokes, which basically, you know, can change the way we perceive things or think about things in that critical window that will be reopened by using psychedelics. So it's really fascinating research, and she did it with octopuses, actually.
So I'm really kind of keen to understand, what is it now that obviously you're very uh, public with your very open sharing of your experiences, in the hope that I'm guessing helps and informs others' choices and healing journeys. But what is it that you're wanting to kind of achieve? You know, how do you frame that and balance that with what else you do? What is it that you're wanting to advocate for or to champion?
I always give this statistic that 1 billion children are abused worldwide every year. And you think about how many of those children survive as adults, and sort of negative manifestations that they experience in adulthood when dealing with healing and trauma. I think for us, the biggest component of us sharing our story is to continue to share stories and be united in that, because the mission is that the more you make people feel comfortable talking about this, they don't feel like they're harboring shame and fear and speaking out. I think there's a lot of stigma even still speaking about sexual abuse. Even as an adult, you know, people are quite uncomfortable talking about this subject. But I feel like the more that we talk about it, the more that we open up these sort of new avenues of healing, which for us is psychedelics. um, I say that when someone has a fear of speaking up, and they don't have to speak up publicly, I always say that you just need to speak to someone, and hopefully it's the right person, as a compassionate listening ear. But I think that stories have a monumental way of changing the way that we see the world. And I've seen it firsthand in the way that it's changed even the legislation of psychedelics, especially with the Texas initiative. So I think I know our mission, our greatest mission, is just to continue sharing our story hopefully opening more minds and hearts and the way that we share it. And I think another part of our mission as well is to show like how beneficial and healing community can be. A month ago, we were keynote speakers at the Psychedelic Science Conference, and one of the other keynote speakers was Bessel. And he talked about how important relationship was, especially regarding PTSD. And he repeated this constantly throughout his keynote. And I just realized, well, not just realized, but I've known for decades now, but it's really my relationship with my sister because I never went through to therapy. I had my very first official therapeutic session with a psychedelic assisted therapist 2 years ago. And I realized that I've always had my sister to talk to, to have someone in your life that doesn't judge you, will not judge you. We can talk to about anything. Doesn't matter if you talk like 3 times earlier, you can still talk maybe another 5 times later if you want. And you never feel like, oh, am I bothering this person? Are we talking too much? Right. Or if she disagrees with me, it doesn't matter. I know that she still loves me regardless. To have that kind of relationship, a very loving and supportive, unconditional love. And I realized when Dr. Bussell was speaking, he was saying that people that go through very traumatic experiences, a lot of times it's because the experience is how they relate and how they react to the world. That's why I love Dr. Gabor Mate. He has this quote that I love where he says, trauma is not about the experience that you've been through, but how you react and see the world due to that trauma. And I realized that I was really walking through this world in a fight and flight mode. I never felt safe ever. And the way I responded to the world and how I responded to myself reflected that fight and flight mode, survival mode that I was living in for decades before I became conscious of subconscious habits that were really debilitating my life. But I also have to say, along with psychedelics, it has been community through my sister. I've always said sisterhood has been the greatest community in my life, and it has changed my life in the most transformative ways. Oprah Winfrey talked about, and there's this great book called What Happened to You? And she wrote it with Dr. Bruce Perry. And she has this quote where she says, I never went to therapy because I had my best friend Gail who I could talk to anytime, no matter how many times a day, no matter how many times a week. And she was my therapy. And I've always felt like that with my sister. I've always felt that my sister is my therapy and she is my community in the healthiest way possible. And I know that I wouldn't be here, or I wouldn't even be here talking about this without our sisterhood and community. But I think a lot of times also people that go through very traumatic experiences or who are dealing with PTSD many times are alone, so they never feel seen. And even though my sister and I never talked about the abuse that we experienced with each other because that was a coping mechanism, we minimized that experience. And one of the ways we minimized it was not to talk about it, but go through life like nothing happened. So for me, as I got older, I realized how important community is because I always felt seen by her. Even though we never talked about what we went through, I was like looking in a mirror because we're identical twins. So I saw her moving through life with a lot of joy despite what we went through. And on some level, I subconsciously was thinking, like, if she can go through the day and make it another day, so can I. Because we often thought about suicide when we were younger. And I can honestly say I don't ideation, but not embarrassed to talk about that because, a lot of children feel that and experience this type of abuse. So, I have no shame in saying like it's because of this woman beside me today is the reason why I'm here. But also a big reason why I am propelling in my healing journey is working with medicinal plants. And, we want to be honest about what's really helping us heal because so many people are struggling. So many people.
what you say is so important as well, though, because you know, often or all the time, people are kind of talking about how they can make therapy accessible, etc. When people can't afford to have a therapist, etc. But what you're saying there is actually community and healing in community is just as helpful as actually having a therapist. And that's the point when you have all of these places that people can't, there aren't therapists or they can't afford therapists, but there are communities out there. There are people, there are friends that they can have. They can go and do things in community, whether that's, singing or playing a sport or whatever it might be in community, crafting, going out cooking, having friends over, whatever it is. That can be really healing. It can be really therapeutic to have those, as you say, friendships. You guys are extremely lucky you had each other, and it was, your community was built in straight into your family, and but there are communities that people can reach and go out to and find, if you're struggling. So I think that's a really great message.
But also,
So I wanted to say very quickly, just regarding the therapy. I just have mentioned that 2 years ago, I had my very first therapy session along with medicinal plants. And I have to say that session was, I would say, I would put it up in one of my top 10, like, transformative life healing experiences, because working with medicinal plants has also made me very open, because I used to attach a lot of shame to what we went through. So years of working on that and releasing that shame, I was able to speak in the context with an expert in the field and feel very comfortable and letting this person know about different parts of my past that I used to not want to speak about. But when I was open to speaking about it, I realized how freeing and healing that was. And for me to be able to change things I was holding on to subconsciously. So I feel like therapy is very, very important, can have very beneficial impact on your life. But you have to be willing to speak about parts of your life that maybe you don't want to speak about, and be very transparent and honest. And I think that's the reason why people are like, oh, I've been in therapy for 10, 15 years. And I went through, a psychedelic experience. And I felt like that really trumped all those years. But I was like, well, were you really being honest? Were you really being open? Because I know I wouldn't have been ready 10 years ago to go into therapy, because you don't have neuroplasticity, before your a psychedelic experience where you're doing therapies. I think that combination of the two can really have a powerful effect. Yes.
yeah, and I think the point around community as well is we see kind of the demise of community given what's happening in digital context. So I do worry about that generation coming through that is digital first as opposed to human connection first. And so I do think it's a really important reminder of the of making sure that we create those opportunities and those moments to be together. I mean, we work entirely remotely. Actually, we are physically in the same place today in different rooms, just doing the podcast. But that important. You can feel it. Whether that's just in a kind of everyday context or in a healing context, having that ability to co-regulate and like you obviously co-regulate so beautifully. You can actually see it on the screen, never and feel it through the screen, which is unusual. You can't normally get it, but it's so strong. It's palpable, even to us now. I am going to ask you the same question that we ask all of our podcast guests as a way of wrapping up, and it's a big one. I'm pretty sure I've got a sense of where you'll go, but I'm going to ask anyway. So we live in a fractured, fearful world. There's lots of anxiety and doubt. There's many reasons to be concerned, whether you scale out and look at that whole macro geopolitical climate crisis piece. If we come into societies and what's happening to societies and that polarization that's being fostered and encouraged, whether we come down to communities and the demise of communities and all of the kind of, whether that's eating together, religions, there's not in the developed world, there's a lot less opportunity to kind of build community in that context, whether we come down to work, families, significant others, or just that relationship to ourselves. There's challenged and there's lots of fragmentation and fracture. if there was a single lever for change, a button that you could push that would be the catalyst for the kind of change that we need to see for humanity, what would that be?
Great question. That's a great question. I think I'm going to touch upon like what I spoke about earlier. I think transparency. Uh, I know for me personally, um, I wasn't able to open up in a way um, until I had my first experience with ibogaine that really transformed the way I thought about my healing and health. Because I'll throw back to health. We do have a huge health issue here. In the States, worldwide too, but in the States with health and the way that we see health. And I know that for me, health and healing are aligned. And I feel like when people are in a better place health wise, they treat not only themselves better, but they treat other people better. And I think that's the one issue that we have a problem with, the way that we treat one another, and not coming from a place of compassion and kindness for the differences that you see in others, no matter their race, their religion, their background. I think that's a huge issue that we have right now in the States. So I would say that for me, if I could push that button, it would be for people to have the ability to be more transparent about the difficulties that they're going through and realize like how alike we are rather than different. And I feel like that sense of unity would be able to help us come closer together. So
I think for me, it's along the same lines, but maybe if I could push a button, there will be unlimited funding for healthcare and anything that has to do with therapeutic modalities. Like I speak to so many people that say like, oh, I would love to, partake in this experience or this medicinal, like, because all the experiences I work with medicinal plants have always been in a healing setting, but they haven't been the most cost effective. We've been quite expensive and or, even regarding just on a general regarding healthcare. Like I would love if there could be like a never ending stream of funds for everyone in this world if it has to do with like healthcare or therapy. Like just imagine having access to anything that you want to do regarding your health and that you wouldn't have to worry about the funds or your how much you're making. I think that would really help so many people like really be their own health advocates, taking that financial component out of it. Because I know how much working on like our physical health and our mental state has really transformed our lives because I really feel like that's the foundation for how people treat others, how they treat themselves, how they have energy to do what they love and be with their family. Like I feel like that's a core foundation. It really wraps around like your health and mental state. So I would love a never-ending stream of funds regarding healthcare and any kind of therapeutic modalities.
You get my vote. I think your answers are excellent, but if you look at part of the perpetuating problem is the fact that we are hardwired to consume these ultra processed foods, these convenience, especially in the States. Like I always struggle.
More conversation about the food.
Definitely good. I would love, yeah, I mean, definitely. I've got so much to say on that point. But I think for today we'll wrap up now, but just with a huge thank you. That was a really great conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And
Thank you so much, Emma and Araminta.